I never thought I'd be standing at the rusted gates of Crescent Valley Amusement Park, a place everyone in our town whispered about but no one dared to visit. The park had been abandoned for over 2 decades, left to rot after a series of unexplainable accidents. They called it cursed. My friends, being the thrill seekers they are, couldn't resist the temptation when Lucas suggested we check it out. "One night of adventure," he had said. I should have known better. The gate creaked as we pushed it open, the sound echoing unnaturally through the empty night. The first thing that hit me was the smell, a mix of rust, wet earth, and something faintly metallic, like old blood. The once bright signs were now faded and cracked, their cheerful colors replaced by a ghostly pale. Vines snaked around the rides, reclaiming them like nature's silent protest. "Man, this is creepy as hell," Sarah muttered, clutching her jacket tightly. She had tried to back out at the last minute, but Lucas had teased her until she gave in. "Relax," Lucas said, shining his flashlight into the darkness. "It's just an old park. People let their imaginations run wild. We'll be fine." I wasn't so sure. My eyes kept darting to the shadows, convinced they were moving. I told myself it was just the wind stirring the overgrown bushes, but deep down, I felt it, like the place was watching us. As we ventured further in, the first thing we saw was the Ferris wheel, towering against the night sky. Its skeletal frame groaned as it swayed gently, though there was no breeze. "Creepy," muttered Ethan, our quietest friend, who rarely spoke unless he had to. "That thing looks like it could collapse any second," I said, trying to mask my unease with humor. Lucas laughed. "Then let's not climb it. Easy solution." The deeper we went, the stranger it felt. The air grew colder, biting through our clothes. Our laughter faded, replaced by an uneasy silence. It wasn't just the park's eerie stillness. It was the feeling that we weren't alone. I tried to shake it off, but the carousel stopped me in my tracks. Its chipped horses stood frozen in mid-leap, their glass eyes dull yet unnervingly lifelike. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, breaking the silence. "Hear what?" Lucas asked, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "A laugh," she said, "like a child's laugh." No one else claimed to hear it, but the tension among us grew thick. We stuck closer together after that, the bravado of earlier replaced by nervous glances over our shoulders. We passed the game stalls, their stuffed animals faded and torn, grinning at us with unsettling expressions. One booth had a broken clown mannequin, its paint peeling and eyes seeming to follow us as we moved past. "Okay, this place is officially nightmare fuel," Ethan muttered. I couldn't disagree. There was a heaviness to the air now, like something unseen pressing down on us. It was subtle at first, small sounds, like distant footsteps or whispers carried on the wind. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, but when Sarah grabbed my arm and pointed, I froze. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "There," she said, her finger trembling. I followed her gaze to the tilt-a-whirl, its cars rusted and covered in grime. At first, I didn't see anything, but then a shadow shifted, a figure standing just out of the flashlight's reach. "Who's there?" Lucas called out, his voice bold but his grip on the flashlight unsteady. No answer. The figure didn't move. "Probably just another thrill seeker like us," he said, though the quiver in his voice betrayed him. But deep down, we all knew the truth. No one else would be stupid enough to come here. And that's when the music started. Faint and warped, the sound of a calliope echoed through the park. It was distant at first, like it was coming from another time, another place, but it grew louder, surrounding us, suffocating us. "That's impossible," Ethan whispered. "Nothing here should still work." We all stood frozen, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. The carousel lights flickered to life, casting long, eerie shadows that danced around us. The horses, lifeless moments ago, now seemed to grin wider, their cracked teeth glinting in the flickering light. I didn't say it out loud, The calliope music kept playing, its haunting, out-of-tune melody echoing through the night. None of us moved at first, our feet rooted to the ground as if the very soil beneath us held us captive. Then, as if snapping out of a collective trance, Lucas hissed, "We need to go. Now." But it wasn't that simple. The park, which had felt empty just moments ago, now seemed alive, breathing, watching. The flickering carousel lights cast eerie shadows across the surrounding rides, and I swore I saw one of the horses move ever so slightly. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "No," Lucas snapped, his bravado faltering. "Because nothing's there. Let's just—" Before he could finish, a loud clang echoed from the Ferris wheel behind us, the kind of sound metal makes when it's being twisted. We all spun around, our flashlights darting toward the towering structure. One of the rusted cars was swaying violently, as though something or someone had just climbed inside. Ethan broke the silence, his voice shaking. "We're not alone here." I didn't want to believe him, but deep down, I already knew he was right. We decided to stick together, moving as a group toward the center of the park where the attractions grew larger and more imposing. Every step we took felt heavier, the ground beneath us soft and unsteady, as if the park itself was trying to swallow us whole. We passed a funhouse with shattered mirrors lining the front. As we walked by, I caught my reflection, or what I thought was my reflection, lingering a second too long, staring at me with eyes that weren't mine. "Stop looking," Lucas barked, grabbing my arm. "It's just your mind playing tricks." But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. The funhouse door creaked open, seemingly on its own. A cold gust of air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of mildew and decay. I thought I heard faint whispers, but they were drowned out by Sarah's scream. We turned to find her standing frozen, staring at one of the game booths. Her flashlight was fixed on the clown mannequin we had passed earlier, except now it wasn't standing still. Its head was tilted, its painted lips curved into a grotesque smile that hadn't been there before. "It moved," Sarah stammered. "I swear it moved." Lucas waved his flashlight at it, trying to prove her wrong. "It's just a stupid mannequin." Before he could finish, the clown's head snapped toward us, its glass eyes gleaming in the dim light. Lucas stumbled back, nearly dropping his flashlight. "Run!" he shouted, and for the first time that night none of us argued. We ran blindly through the park, past crumbling roller coasters and rusted swings that creaked ominously, as if they were swaying under some unseen force. The music from the carousel grew louder, following us like a predator stalking its prey. We finally stopped near the bumper cars, gasping for breath. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of our own frantic breathing. "What the hell is going on?" Ethan demanded, his usually calm demeanor shattered. "I don't know," Lucas admitted, his voice shaking. "But we need to get out of here." "That's what I've been saying," Sarah snapped, tears streaming down her face. "This place isn't normal. We shouldn't have come here." She was right, of course, but it was too late for regrets. The park wasn't going to let us leave. As we argued, the bumper cars around us began to hum softly, their lights flickering to life. One by one, the cars jolted forward, slamming into each other as if controlled by invisible drivers. "Move," I shouted, pulling Sarah away just as one of the cars sped toward us. It hit the spot where she had been standing moments ago, sparks flying as metal scraped against metal. "What's controlling them?" Ethan yelled, dodging another car. "I don't know," Lucas shouted back. "Just keep moving." We darted toward the nearest building, a dilapidated arcade with shattered windows and faded signs. The moment we stepped inside, the air grew colder, and the faint hum of the bumper cars outside was replaced by the sound of old arcade machines flickering to life. "Why are they turning on?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the din of 8-bit sound effects. The machines lit up one by one, their screens displaying the same message. "Welcome back." I felt my stomach drop.
"This isn't random," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "It knows we're here." Before anyone could respond, the doors slammed shut behind us, the sound reverberating through the arcade. The lights above flickered, plunging us into darkness for a split second before a single spotlight illuminated the center of the room.
There, standing beneath it, was a figure. A man dressed as a carnival ringleader, his face obscured by a cracked porcelain mask. He didn't move, but his presence was suffocating. "Who are you?" Lucas demanded, his voice shaking. The figure tilted its head, the mask cracking further as it spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You shouldn't have come here." We didn't wait to hear more. Lucas grabbed a chair and hurled it at the nearest window, shattering the glass. "Go!" he shouted, and we scrambled out into the night. But the park had changed. The paths twisted and turned, leading us in circles. The attractions loomed larger, their grotesque shapes seeming to shift and writhe in the darkness. The music followed us, growing louder and more distorted, until it was all I could hear. I wanted to scream, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow darting between the rides, moving too fast to be human. "What was that?" Sarah cried, clutching my arm. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. We kept moving, but no matter where we went, the shadow followed, always just out of sight but close enough to feel its presence. Finally, we reached the park's exit, or what should have been the exit. The gates were gone, replaced by a solid wall of black, swirling mist. "We're trapped," Ethan said, his voice hollow. The shadow emerged from the mist, taking shape as it approached. It was the ringleader, his cracked mask now fully shattered, revealing a hollow, empty void where his face should have been. "You can't leave," he said, his voice a chilling whisper. "Not until the park has had its fun." The ringleader's hollow voice sent shivers down my spine, and for a moment none of us moved. The black mist behind him swirled like a living thing, and I couldn't tell where it ended or began. "What do you want?" Lucas shouted, his voice trembling despite his attempts to sound brave. The ringleader tilted his head again, that eerie motion making my stomach churn. "It's not about what I want," he said, his tone dripping with malice. "The park decides, and the park wants you." Before anyone could react, the ground beneath us shifted violently. It felt like the entire park was alive, rearranging itself to trap us further. The rides groaned, their rusted frames creaking as though they were waking from a long slumber. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her away. We sprinted toward the nearest open path, but the park seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. No matter how far we ran, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, herded like prey. The ringleader's laugh echoed behind us, low and guttural, growing louder with every step. We turned a corner and found ourselves in front of the Ferris wheel again, its skeletal frame towering over us like a sentinel. The cars were no longer empty. Dark, shadowy figures sat in them, their glowing eyes fixed on us. The wheel began to turn, its rusted metal grinding like nails on a chalkboard. "This isn't real," Ethan muttered, clutching his head. "It can't be real. It's real enough," Lucas snapped, dragging him forward. The carousel ahead of us suddenly blazed to life, its lights spinning so fast they blurred together. The horses moved on their own, their chipped mouths snapping open and shut as though they were alive. "We're trapped," Sarah cried, her voice breaking. "No," I said, my mind racing. "There has to be a way out." That's when I remembered something, an old story I'd heard about the park. The original owner had built a secret tunnel beneath the funhouse, a supposed emergency escape route. It was just a rumor, but at that moment, it was our only hope. "This way," I shouted, leading the group toward the funhouse. The building loomed ahead, its shattered mirrors reflecting distorted versions of us as we stumbled inside. The air was thick and suffocating, every breath a struggle. The whispers started again, growing louder with every step. "I don't like this," Sarah whimpered, clinging to my arm. "Just keep going," I said, trying to sound confident even though my heart was pounding.
We reached the center of the funhouse, where a massive mirror stood cracked but intact. Behind it, faint outlines of stairs were visible. Lucas didn't hesitate. He grabbed a nearby metal rod and smashed the glass, revealing a narrow staircase leading downward. "Go," he urged, and we didn't need to be told twice. We descended into the darkness, the whispers following us like a swarm of insects. The staircase seemed endless, spiraling deeper and deeper into the ground. Just when I thought we'd never reach the bottom, we stumbled into a narrow tunnel lit by flickering, sickly yellow bulbs. "This must be it," Ethan said, his voice shaking.
The tunnel stretched on forever, or so it seemed. We ran, the sound of footsteps and laughter echoing behind us. The ringleader's voice boomed, his words chilling. "You can't escape the park. You are part of it now." I didn't dare look back. Finally, we reached a rusted metal door at the end of the tunnel. Lucas threw his weight against it, and with a groan, it creaked open, revealing the night sky. We stumbled out onto a deserted road, gasping for air. For a moment, everything was silent. The park loomed in the distance, its lights now extinguished. It was as if it had gone back to sleep, content with letting us leave, or so we thought. "We made it," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. But deep down I knew it wasn't over. As we stood there catching our breath, I noticed something in the distance, a single light glowing faintly in the park. It was the carousel, spinning slowly, its calliope music faint but unmistakable. Ethan spoke first, his voice hollow. "Did we really escape?" No one answered. Then Lucas reached into his pocket, his face turning pale. He pulled out a small, cracked porcelain mask, the same one the ringleader had worn. "I didn't take this," he said, his voice barely audible. The music grew louder, echoing through the still night, and I realized the truth. We hadn't escaped. Not really. The park had let us go, but it hadn't let us leave. And as we stood there on the empty road, the shadows of the park seemed to stretch toward us, promising that one day it would call us back. I never believed in ghost stories. They were just that, stories. Tales spun around campfires or whispered in dark bedrooms to make you shiver before bed. But now, as I stand at the rusted gates of the old amusement park, I realize I might have underestimated how real those tales could be. The place had been abandoned for over 2 decades. Locals called it Whispering Pines Funland, though no one dared to go near it anymore. The name itself felt like a cruel joke. Pine trees loomed around the property, their branches creaking like ancient voices in the wind. The sign, once bright with neon colors, now hung at an awkward angle, its letters faded and barely legible. I should explain why I'm here. My friends, Elliot, Grace, and Mia, convinced me it would be a thrill. Urban exploring, they called it. Grace had heard the stories, how the park had been shut down after a tragic accident, how the owner vanished without a trace, how people claimed to hear laughter echoing from inside late at night. I wasn't sold on the idea, but peer pressure has a funny way of making you do stupid things. The gate groaned as Elliot pushed it open, the sound piercing the stillness of the night. The 4 of us exchanged nervous glances, but no one said anything. Grace had a flashlight, its beam cutting through the fog that clung stubbornly to the ground. The air was heavy, damp, and smelled of mildew and rust. "Doesn't look so bad," Elliot joked, his voice too loud. It echoed unnervingly, as if the park itself were mocking him. The main walkway stretched before us, flanked by crumbling booths and derelict rides. A carousel stood to our right, its once vivid horses now faded and peeling, their glass eyes staring blankly into the dark. The soft tinkling of carousel music played faintly in my head, though I knew it was just my imagination, or at least I hoped it was. "Let's check out the Ferris wheel," Mia suggested, pointing to the massive structure looming in the distance. It was unmistakable, its skeletal frame casting an eerie silhouette against the moonlit sky. As we walked deeper into the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. It wasn't anything I could see or hear, but it was there, a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I looked back, half expecting to see someone or something following us, but the path was empty. creepy, isn't it? Grace said, breaking the silence. She shone her flashlight onto an old cotton candy machine, its glass cracked and clouded with grime. Imagine how lively this place must have been. Families, kids laughing, music playing. Her voice trailed off, and for a moment, none of us spoke. We reached the Ferris wheel, and that's when the unease kicked into overdrive. The cars hung precariously, some missing entirely. The metal was rusted, streaked with what looked like old blood. Okay, now it's creepy, Elliot muttered. He tried to laugh, but it came out strained. A sudden breeze swept through the park, cold and sharp. It carried a faint sound with it. Was it laughter? I froze, my heart pounding. Did you hear that? I whispered. Hear what? Mia asked, but her voice was unsteady. I swear I heard laughing. Don't freak yourself out, Elliot said, though he looked just as uneasy. Grace turned toward the carousel. I think it came from over there. Her flashlight beam swept across the ride, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move. A shadow. A figure. I couldn't be sure. My mouth went dry, and I felt my hands clench into fists. Let's keep moving, I said, my voice tight. But as we turned to leave, the Ferris wheel groaned, an unnatural metallic screech that made us all jump. It started to move, slowly, unevenly, as if some invisible force had decided it was time to bring it back to life. We stood frozen, staring in disbelief. The wheel hadn't moved in years. It was practically falling apart, but there it was, creaking and spinning, the wind howling through its rusted joints. Okay, I'm officially creeped out, Mia whispered. None of us argued. I didn't believe in ghost stories. Not until that night. We stared at the Ferris wheel, its rusted frame groaning louder with every rotation. It didn't make sense. There was no power here, no wind strong enough to move something that big. My heart raced as I tried to rationalize it, but the chill crawling up my spine refused to be ignored. Someone's messing with us, Elliot said, his voice shaky despite the bravado he was trying to muster. Who? Grace asked, shining her flashlight around. The beam swept across empty booths, broken rides, and shadows that seemed to stretch and shift unnaturally. No answer. Just the screeching of the wheel and the faint sound of... Was that music? It was so soft I almost thought I was imagining it. A warped, eerie tune, like a child's music box playing underwater. Guys, let's just leave, Mia said, clutching my arm. She'd always been the bravest of us, so seeing her this scared made my stomach knot. Leave. We just got here, Elliot replied, though he wasn't convincing anyone, not even himself. Before we could argue, Grace froze. Did you see that? She whispered, her flashlight trembling in her hand. See what? I asked, though I didn't want to know the answer. Over there. She pointed toward the carousel. Something moved. We all turned to look. The carousel stood still, its chipped horses bathed in moonlight. For a moment, everything was silent except for the Ferris wheels creaking. Then the carousel came to life. It started slowly, the platform turning with a rusty whine. The music was warped, a distorted version of a cheerful carnival tune. The horses moved up and down as if eager to gallop away. Okay, nope, we're leaving, Mia said, tugging at my arm. But none of us moved. We were rooted to the spot, unable to look away from the grotesque display. That's when I saw it. A figure. A child. She was sitting on one of the horses, her head bowed, long hair obscuring her face. She was dressed in what looked like a frilly, old-fashioned dress, tattered and dirt-streaked. Do you see her? I whispered. I do, Grace stammered. Who is that? Elliot asked, stepping back. The girl lifted her head. Her eyes glinted in the moonlight, unnaturally bright. A crooked smile spread across her face, and she whispered something, though we were too far away to hear. I'm out of here, Elliot said, spinning on his heel. He didn't get far. A deafening crash echoed through the park, and we all whipped around to see the Ferris wheel grinding to a halt. One of the cars at the top broke loose, plummeting to the ground with a bone-rattling impact. Dust and debris flew everywhere, and we shielded our faces. When the dust settled, the girl was gone. The carousel was still spinning, the music louder now, almost deafening. "We need to go," Grace said, her voice barely audible over the noise. We turned back toward the entrance, but the path we'd come down seemed different. The booths were closer together, their once empty shelves now filled with grotesque prizes, porcelain dolls with cracked faces, stuffed animals with missing eyes, and strange jars filled with murky liquid. "This isn't right," Mia whispered, her grip tightening on my arm. "It's just our nerves," Elliot said, though he didn't sound convinced. We kept moving, sticking close together. The air grew colder with every step, and that unsettling music followed us, growing fainter but never disappearing entirely. Then we heard it. Footsteps. They weren't ours. They were quick, erratic, and coming from behind us. "Don't look back," I said, though I couldn't stop myself. A tall, shadowy figure stood at the end of the path. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It didn't move, but I felt its gaze pierce through me. "Run!" Mia screamed, and we did. We darted between booths, past broken rides, the shadow always just behind us. No matter how fast we ran, we couldn't seem to lose it. The laughter started then, high-pitched and echoing like a dozen children playing hide-and-seek in the dark. We burst into an open area where the bumper cars used to be. The cars were scattered, some overturned, others crushed like they'd been stomped on by something massive. The laughter stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. "What now?" Elliot panted, doubling over to catch his breath. "Just keep moving," Grace said, though she didn't seem to know where we were going. A low growl cut through the quiet, sending chills down my spine. It came from one of the bumper cars. We all turned to see the car shaking violently, its headlights flickering on and off. "That's not possible," Mia whispered. The growling grew louder, and then the car shot forward, coming straight at us. We scattered, narrowly avoiding being hit as it slammed into a nearby booth, splintering the wood. "This place is alive," Grace said, her voice trembling. "We have to find a way out," I said, though I had no idea how. The shadow reappeared, this time closer. It stood in the middle of the open area, its head tilting back and forth like it was studying us. Then it took a step forward. "Split up," Elliot shouted. "No," I yelled, but it was too late. He bolted to the left, Grace to the right, leaving me and Mia frozen in the middle. "Come on!" Mia pulled me toward the path Grace had taken. We ran blindly, the shadow's heavy footsteps echoing behind us. The park seemed to shift around us, the paths twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. It was like the place was alive, playing with us, trapping us. When we finally stopped, gasping for breath, we found ourselves in front of the fun house. Its entrance was a gaping clown's mouth, the paint faded and peeling, the grin sinister. "Of all places," Mia muttered, shaking her head. But the sound of footsteps and that awful laughter left us no choice. We stepped inside. The air inside the funhouse was suffocating, heavy with the scent of damp wood and mildew. Dim, flickering lights barely illuminated the narrow, winding corridor ahead. Every step we took echoed eerily, the sound bouncing off the distorted mirrors lining the walls. "This is a bad idea," Mia whispered, clutching my arm. "I know," I replied, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. But what choice did we have? The shadow was out there, and this funhouse, as unsettling as it was, felt like the lesser of two evils. As we moved deeper, the distorted mirrors reflected versions of ourselves that felt wrong. My reflection grinned back at me, its eyes hollow and dark. Mia's reflection seemed to move slightly out of sync, her head tilting unnaturally to the side. "Don't look at them," I muttered, grabbing her hand and pulling her forward. The corridor led to a large circular room. At its center was a broken spinning platform, once part of some carnival trick. The walls were painted with faded murals of clowns and carnival goers, their smiles chipped and sinister under the dim light. Suddenly, the door behind us slammed shut with a deafening bang. Mia screamed, and I spun around, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. "We're trapped," she said, panic rising in her voice. "We'll find another way out," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. As I scanned the room, something caught my eye. A figure stood in the shadows on the far side, just beyond the reach of the light. It wasn't the tall shadow from before. This one was smaller, almost childlike. "Hello," I called, my voice trembling. The figure stepped into the light. It was the girl from the carousel. Her face was pale, her dress torn and dirty. She stared at us with wide, unblinking eyes, her head tilted slightly to the side. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice soft but hollow, like it was coming from far away. "We didn't mean to disturb anything," Mia said quickly. "We'll leave. Just let us go." The girl's lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile. "You can't leave," she said. "Not yet. They won't let you." "They?" I asked, dreading the answer. Before she could reply, the room began to shake. The murals on the walls seemed to come alive, the painted clowns twisting and contorting, their eyes following us. The spinning platform creaked and groaned, moving ever so slightly. "They're here," the girl whispered. Her eyes grew wider, and she pointed to the mirrors surrounding us. I turned to look, and my blood ran cold. The reflections in the mirrors weren't ours anymore. They were dark figures, their faces featureless, their forms shifting like smoke. One by one they began to step out of the mirrors, their movements jerky and unnatural. "Run," I yelled, grabbing Mia's hand. We bolted through an open archway, leaving the girl and the shadowy figures behind. The hallway twisted and turned, the floor creaking beneath our feet. It felt endless, like we were running in circles. The laughter returned, louder and more menacing than before. It seemed to come from everywhere, surrounding us, mocking us. We burst into another room, this one filled with old carnival props, oversized playing cards, broken balloons, and a cracked fortune-telling machine. In the center of the room stood Elliot. "Elliot," Mia cried, rushing toward him. But something was wrong. He didn't move, didn't even acknowledge us. As we got closer, I saw why. His face was blank, his eyes wide and empty. It was like he wasn't there anymore, just a shell of himself. "Elliot," I said, shaking his shoulder. His head snapped toward me, his neck bending at an unnatural angle. His mouth opened, but instead of words, a deep guttural growl escaped. "Get back," I shouted, pulling Mia away. Elliot, or whatever he had become, lurched forward, his movements stiff and puppet-like. We stumbled backward, tripping over the broken props as he advanced. Out of nowhere, the girl appeared again, standing between us and Elliot. "Leave him," she said, her voice firm. "He's already theirs." "What do you mean?" Mia demanded, tears streaming down her face. "There's no saving him," the girl said. "But you can still escape. Follow me." With no other option, we followed her through another twisting corridor. The walls seemed to close in around us, the air growing colder with every step. Finally, we emerged into the open air. We were back outside, standing at the edge of the park. The Ferris wheel loomed in the distance, now completely still. "This is where we part ways," the girl said, turning to face us. "Come with us," I said. She shook her head. "I can't. This is my home now." Before we could say anything else, she stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. Mia and I didn't waste any time. We ran until we were back at the car, gasping for air and covered in sweat. As we sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The park was dark and silent, but for a brief moment, I thought I saw the Ferris wheel move again. We never talked about that night, and we never went back. But sometimes in the dead of night, I hear the faint sound of carnival music, and I wonder if the park still remembers us.